We have some very good friends we'd like you to meet. American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Marianas, Palau, FSM, and the Marshall Islands. All of these islands have had long ties with the U.S. Some are members of the American family today. Others are independent, adopted children we might call them, who have set up their own households. There's Guam, an incorporated territory since 1899, when the U.S. took possession of the island at the end of the Spanish-American War. American Samoa has been a territory for almost as long, since 1900, when the U.S. annexed the island and entrusted it to the administration of the Navy. The others were once a part of the trust territory administered by the U.S. under the United Nations. Before World War II, they were occupied by Japan. After these islands were seized by U.S. troops in the last year of the war, they were governed by the U.S. for 30 years or longer. The Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, like Guam and American Samoa, remains tied to the American system and is subject to U.S. law. Palau, the Marshalls, and the Federated States of Micronesia have all become independent nations, but they remain strongly tied to the U.S. through the Compact of Free Association. These islands may be a part of the American family, but they live a long way from home. They're halfway around the world from Washington, D.C. Palau is 20 hours flying time from the East Coast, and that's without counting layover time. The total population of the area is nearly 500,000, but population doesn't tell half the story. The greatest obstacle to providing health services is not the region's numbers, but its geography. The islands are scattered over 3 million square miles of water, roughly the area of the U.S., but the total landmass would easily fit into the state of Rhode Island. Its largest towns are the size of rural communities in the U.S. Its villages, often isolated, defy the best efforts of planners to provide even the most basic health services. Let's look at these islands a little more closely. The most developed are Guam and the Northern Marianas. Both have a growing tourist industry and a strong business sector. They have paved roads, fast food places, and American standard hospitals. At the other end of the modernization spectrum are the Federated States of Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, new nations struggling to develop economies capable of supporting their people. With a high birth rate and few natural resources, FSM and the Marshalls, along with Palau, have had to rely on U.S. assistance to support themselves. A large percentage of the population in FSM and the Marshalls still live off the land and sea. In the Marshalls, 2 atolls have a combined population of over 35,000. The remaining 1/3 of the people are scattered over 20 other atolls, many with a population of no more than a few hundred. There are flights once or twice a week on an 8-seat single-engine plane for those who can afford the fare. Others must rely on a government ship that visits the island perhaps 2 or 3 times a year. The FSM population of 107,000 would fit into the Rose Bowl. As it is, however, they are dispersed on over 60 islands and atolls, strung out across an archipelago 2,000 miles long. There are a few towns of between 2,000 and 10,000 people. The rest live in villages of a few hundred souls. There are no Amtrak stations, not even Greyhound bus terminals in these places. Then there are the outlying islands, several hundred miles from the centers, that can be reached only by ship when the ship is running. The health problems that these people face are as varied as the islands themselves. On several islands there have been outbreaks of cholera and dengue fever in recent years. Cases of leprosy are still found, despite intensive efforts to eradicate the disease. Influenza and other epidemics remain common, especially on less developed islands, where poor sanitation, contaminated drinking water, and close living breeds infectious disease. Gonorrhea and other sexually transmitted diseases are also common. Guam has one of the highest rates of AIDS in the Pacific, but the disease has appeared in even some of the more isolated island communities. Modernization, with the improved living conditions it brings, has helped control TB, measles, and some of the other plagues of the past. But the new lifestyle it brings, with rich Western foods and sedentary ways, has also generated serious new afflictions, especially illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. In the Marshalls, American Samoa, and parts of FSM, the diabetes rate among islanders is 3 or 4 times higher than among Americans. Today, life expectancy in FSM, Palau, and the Marshalls is 10 to 15 years lower than in the U.S. What does it take to keep these people healthy? Medical facilities are often substandard, and many are bad even by simple island standards. These hospitals and dispensaries need major repair and renovation. The medical apparatus that U.S. communities take for granted, mammograms, ultrasound machines, life support systems, and even dialysis machines, are too expensive for most of the islands. Ponape and Majuro, which once offered dialysis, have been forced to stop because of the prohibitive cost. Many services can't be offered in the islands. Even on Guam, lab samples often have to be sent off-island for testing. Hospitals in some of the smaller island groups are unable to do even basic procedures. Costly referrals have been eating up a large part of the budget for some of the smaller island states. Some island groups have been spending nearly 20% of their health services budget in referrals to Hawaii, Guam, and the Philippines. Health insurance is widespread on Guam and the Northern Marianas, but not yet in other island groups. People of the former Trust Territory are emerging from a history of free health care in the islands. Why should they pay for what they have become accustomed to receiving free? 2 generations of locally born medical officers have served the needs of their people for over 50 years. When they began retiring, a new group of medical officers was trained in a program that operated on Ponape for 10 years, from 1986 to 1996. The program turned out 70 medical officers to help staff the dispensaries and hospitals in the islands. These medical officers need ongoing training, and the others on their staff even more so. Yet even this will have little impact if the other obstacles to good health care are not overcome. Good health services, after all, requires much more than trained and dedicated doctors. Health standards vary enormously from place to place. People in some of the smaller islands take what they can get. Visits from the doctor are rare. There is a health aide to provide service for people, but the dispensary is often without power and even running water. Worst of all, the shelves of the dispensaries are often empty. Medicines, even those as basic as antibiotics and painkillers, run out. Orders are late in being placed, sometimes due to lack of funding, and supplies are notoriously slow in reaching outlying islands. Even hospitals in some of the larger islands experience these shortages and feel the effects of a weak support system. While the developed world urges that prevention be made the new battle line in the campaign against illness, our relatives overseas are in retreat and retrenchment. Basic healthcare needs absorbed their attention and sapped their limited resources. They are fighting the war against disease with inadequate weapons. Let's hope that our distant family members won't have to fight alone.